Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. We have a lot to cover today. My name is Eliza Talbot, and I'm the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce Hawaii. So please make sure you're muted today throughout the webinar, and we will take audience questions via the Q&A feature. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the team at the Chamber speaks to business owners and employees throughout the state all the time, and a lot of the same concerns come up. We hear about employee burnout, quiet quitting, and workforce shortages in every industry now. So while the financial impact of the pandemic is really easy to quantify, the mental strain of what we all endured over the last 3 years is much harder to define. So I'm really thrilled today to be able to introduce our great guest speakers to talk about why mental health matters for business. Today we have Nancy Kriegman. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Domestic Violence Action Center. We have Robin Stuber, Executive Wellness Coach. Brian Talisayan, Executive Director of Mental Health America of Hawaii. And Belinda Danielson from the Adult Mental Health Division of the State of Hawaii Department of Health. So I will turn over the program to Katie Kahanui, who is the brainchild of today's event and also the Manager of Workforce Development for the Chamber of Commerce Hawaii. And thanks everybody so much for joining us today.
Eliza, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. And first of all, I also wanted to say thank you. I know this webinar had to get rescheduled, and so a good bunch of you asked that this webinar be recorded. So just wanted to let you all know that this will be recorded after the webinar is done. We'll have it up on our website, but also on our social media channels where you can continue to watch if you weren't able to catch it. So again, thank you so much for being here today. I'm Katie Kahanui. I'm the Workforce Development Manager here at the Chamber of Commerce. And we wanted to offer this webinar just to start the conversations about mental health awareness in specifically in the workplace. And so we had a mental health awareness campaign that ran the whole month of May, which included not only this webinar, but a podcast, a webpage for resources, and other community events. And so I also wanted to thank all of our panelists for being here today, because you folks have stepped up and offered your time and your resources to be able to speak with our attendees. So thank you all. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so before we dive into our conversation, we just wanted to share some results from our recent Chamber survey. And so back in April, the Chamber launched a survey out to our member base, and that was really just to get some baseline data about the types of mental health resources that exist in our community right now, but also where our gaps of opportunity exist. And so what resources are not being shared, what people may not be aware of, and we kind of just wanted to gauge where we are at this moment in time. And so the survey, I believe, had 10 or 11 questions, but I'm going to share just 3 of them, and we'll have all of the survey results up on our mental health resource page after this. And so the first question was, if your organization provided education and or training to employees on mental health awareness, or how to spot mental health issues in your staff. And then we had an overwhelmingly large response of people who said no, or maybe they just weren't sure if it existed in their community. Only 35% of companies identified that they did have one. And so that's, of course, representative of the folks who did answer, but this is just good information for us to move forward with. And then we asked if people's organizations communicated mental health resources through either one of the following options. And so, of course, most of them answered that they got their information through EAPs or employee assistance programs, which sometimes you only hear about once when you get hired or when you're renewing your health information every year. So that was one of the big ones. We also have company newsletters as well as staff workshops and trainings. The results kind of lowered as we got through those, but this is also some good baseline data for us to observe. And then lastly, we asked if organizations offered training for managerial staff, which is something that's probably kind of new, but we think that it's important just because we have to be able to identify if our staff may be going through something and how we can be of support to them. And so again, a large number of people said no. Most were also unsure, but a little under 15% said that they did offer some training for managerial staff. And so I think that's also a good point where we can start kind of building the conversation around why that's important, and then include how we can start incorporating that into our workplaces. Okay, sorry, my screen may have froze. It's transitioning very slowly on my end. But right now we can actually jump into our panel portion if it doesn't move over. The next slide was really just an introduction and a thank you to our panelists again. Oh, here we go. Okay, great. So again, just wanted to thank all of our panelists, Brian, Nancy, Robin, and Belinda, for being here today. All of them combined have decades of experience in mental health and working with executives, business leaders, and just our community members on the topic and the importance of mental health. And so wanted to thank them again for being a part of this conversation. Okay, so I will go ahead and pull down my slides. For folks who may have questions during the webinar, feel free to submit them either in the chat or in our Q&A portion. We have the last 15 minutes of today to address any questions you may have if you want to ask our panelists. So feel free to start plugging that in as soon as they come up for you. But first, we wanted to jump into just the prevalence and just the fact that this is something that exists in our workplace. And we know that 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health issue within any given year. And when we look at those numbers as they pertain to the workplace nationally, that equates to about 4.5 million people in our workplace who are affected. And so I wanted to start off with Brian and Belinda just to get some of your input. What are some of the patterns, the issues, or just things that you notice that people in our local community tend to face here when it comes to mental health issues? And we can start with Brian, and then we can go over to Belinda.
Sure. I think, especially in different industries, the topic of mental health is still a very difficult conversation to have. There's still a lot of shame, stigma, and discrimination that's associated with mental health, especially in Hawaii because of how diverse our communities are. And I see that as one of the biggest barriers to having an open and honest communication about mental health in the workplace.
Good morning. Thank Katie for providing us this opportunity to join and provide some information for our workforce. I think Brian is right. A lot of the stigma that still surrounds mental health is still alive and well, unfortunately. But through the pandemic, specifically in adult mental health, we've seen a lot of people, which is a good thing, starting to recognize that mental health does exist, right? That there's that it could be even the person next to you. It could be yourself. It could be your child. So I think a lot of the, especially from the call center side, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about resources, a lot of people were starting to reach out, through the pandemic when they started to lose their jobs, when they started to feel anxiety about, getting sick, about not having enough resources. People were recognizing that, yeah, I'm going to need some help, that it's okay to talk about it. And I think in the workforce, that is something we're recognizing, is that a lot of people who hadn't called before, who hadn't thought they could, were starting to reach out. So I think it's issues around anxiety, around depression, around just stressors in their lives. They're starting to recognize that and reaching out for help. It's not to the level that I think that's normalized yet, but at least in pockets, people individually are recognizing that there is help out there and starting to be okay to take that first step. So that's kind of what we're seeing on our end.
No, thank you so much for that. I was having a conversation last week about this, and something that I remembered from it was just that we want to get to a point where we can be comfortable enough to share if something is affecting us at the point where it's a yellow flag maybe and not a red flag. Sometimes we wait until it's too much of an emergency, or we just hold it in because we don't feel comfortable. But our workplaces, where we spend a third or more sometimes of our day, should be the place where we feel comfortable to talk about things like this. So thank you for bringing up that this is something that is important, but it's still needed to be woven into how we operate in the workplace a little bit more. And so when it comes to services or benefits that employees can offer, just to kind of tail on that conversation, Belinda, what do you think employees can offer that would be of good benefit to employees?
I think this is a one example, a great example, actually, that employees, it's not costly to them to have like these webinars that they could post and just have access to their staff. And it could be a variety of topics, right? It could be domestic violence, it could be substance use, it could be mental health, anxiety, depression, any of these common and very important mental health issues. They can easily, post information, trainings, just warning signs, right? Help resources. If employers can, first of all, promote it within their workspace, that it's a fact of life that we all go through moments in our lives that we are going to be challenged with. And here are some warning signs, here's some information, and here are some resources that's readily available to folks. I think that goes a long way in promoting that environment within the workforce and allowing people to really normalize that we all struggle with mental health, and mental health is important. And as the first step is recognizing it and then managing it. But I think we have an expert here that can even go beyond that with the prevention side of it, right? The wellness that comes into play as well. But for folks that with currently existing issues, just to be make it more commonplace and have access to it. I mean, nowadays it's really easy to do. So if we can have those supports across the board, I think that's a beginning. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Belinda. And actually, one of the questions that we had in our survey that I didn't share in the slide yet was about the barriers that companies feel that they faced when it came to accessing mental health resources or just being able to share it. In addition to the stigma, like Brian mentioned, it was money, and people weren't sure if they could afford these resources. They weren't sure what they could get, even for free. But, like you said, we'll go into the resources that exist later. And I was surprised to see just how many things exist that anybody here can utilize. And so there are so many wonderful resources, and we hope that things like this webinar can be added to that for folks. So thank you. And Nancy, I know that you work with a very specific population, but I think you're very in tune about the types of benefits that are of benefit to employees, but also things that you feel would make them comfortable to reach out if their employer offered it. What are some things that stand out for you?
Good morning. Thanks for having us. I think the more we have community conversations and specific conversations about the challenges our workforce face, the better we will all be. When we're all better off. I think the first step, and we've already spoken a teeny bit about this, is destigmatizing. I think Brian said there's a stigma. I think companies can play a big role in destigmatizing, using the words, displaying posters, training their supervisors and their HR professionals so that it is, people feel they have permission to talk about it. Often people don't volunteer this information. They're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of workplace disciplinary action. They're afraid of losing their job. So if we can destigmatize and, as Belinda says, normalize the fact that we all experience challenges and there are plenty of resources we can all seek. I think creating flexibility in the workplace is another way. After we destigmatize it, we can create some flexibility so that maybe there's lunch and learns, or there's opportunities for employees to change their work schedule so they can go for counseling or spend more time with their children if that's a point of anxiety. Maybe change the working hours from 9 to 6 instead of 8 to 5. I mean, there are different kinds of adjustments that employers can consider in order to contribute to a healthy workforce. Because if people are, or when people are suffering from mental health challenges, they're not being their most productive. And that's really what companies are aiming for, is a productive workforce. So together we can invent ways for companies to support their employees, which in effect contributes to the well-being of the community.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That's a perfect segue into our next question, which has to do with stressful work environments and what we can do not only as employers, but also as employees and staff to help to combat and work with that. And so in highly stressful work environments, we know that it leads to low productivity. You may just be completely disengaged, you might disassociate at work, and it affects your performance. And recently, I was really fortunate to attend a training that Robin did on mental health in the workplace. And so, Robin, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about a term that you bring up a lot, which is mental fitness. And so when it comes to mental fitness, how can employers incorporate that into how they work, but also how can us as staff members and parts of organizations also utilize mental fitness?
Thanks, Katie, and good morning, everyone. So mental fitness can be thought of as mental resilience, or our capacity to respond to life challenges with a positive rather than a negative mindset. And just like physical fitness, it impacts how physical fitness impacts our ability to do things, participate in activities and participate in life. And similarly, mental fitness impacts how quickly we recover from challenges that bring stress in our lives and stay in a thriving mindset longer. And I believe that mental fitness has always been an important skill for everyone, really, leaders especially, because what we've noticed is that the pace of change is so rapid these days, and the kind of changes that we're having to come up against is so varied. And so it's important to know that stress brings about a kind of a brain activation that makes us prone to negativity and fear-based decision makings. And so leaders can start to lose, well, not only leaders, but all employees can begin to lose the ability to connect with others with empathy. The negativity also amplifies our cognitive biases. It blurs our sense of where our personal boundaries might be. And so we might tend to burn the candle at both ends because we just don't know where to stop. But worst of all, when we allow mental stress to persist, that can manifest downstream later on in life as chronic disease and potentially even more mental disease as well. So it's critical to intentionally, for everyone, all of us, to work every day on our mental fitness and to stay out of that negativity spiral. So that we can operate in the mindset that's best for intuitive awareness, innovative and creative thinking, and human connection. And so just as we don't start brushing our teeth when we get a cavity, right? We brush our teeth every day in order to have the kind of healthy oral hygiene that promotes healthy teeth and healthy gums and just a healthy body in general. And so what I would say is for all employees, all the way from the top to everyone in an organization should be practicing some kind of mental fitness every day.
Robin, thank you so much. And I think that also plays into what we were talking about before on how you can recognize things when they get to that yellow flag stage, because you're able to work through it quicker and be a little more proactive as you would have been, whether you caught it when it was a little too late to address. So thank you for that. And then I also wanted to go and talk a little bit about the preventative side of things, because we don't want to be responding the whole time when things are, a little too big to deal with, or we're affected a little too much. But and I'll open up this question for all of you, but what are some of the preventative things that we can do in our lives, not just in our workplace, that can make it a little bit easier for us to deal with life stresses?
I think, one of the things would be participating in resilience trainings in the community, or finding what spirit means to you. If you're a spiritual or religious person, connecting with that, whether you participate in meditation or exercise. And exercise can look different for other people. It could be gardening, could be fishing, could be surfing, could be actually at the gym, and I think a lot of these things that we can practice in our daily lives make a huge impact on our overall mental wellness and our overall mental fitness. And I think this is something that it's a skill building, right? It's not something that you can just start doing automatically and stick to it. A lot of people go through stages of change, and they adapt to different routines. And I think find what matters to you, find what makes you feel good, and do it.
Yes, I can add to that. And I think Brian's absolutely right. And as I mentioned before, having something that you're doing every single day to build your ability, your mental resilience is really important. But first of all, recognize what kinds of thoughts are you having? What would you say is the ratio of negative to positive thoughts that you're having during the day? There is an interesting ratio of 3-to-1, which is that it takes 3 positive thoughts and emotions to counter every 1 negative. And so by becoming aware of where your thoughts are throughout the day and perhaps what your ratio is, you may discover that you might want to purposefully bring in more positivity into your life, whether that's playing with your pet, going outside and appreciating the outdoors, starting a gratitude journal, just bringing in things that, as Brian said, bringing more joy and activity into your life.
And I would add, I love the suggestions that Robin and Brian have offered. To me, it feels very important to elevate the belief in self-care. I mean, we saw that the phrase is kind of overused right now, but if each one of us can embrace the principle and then figure out, as Brian and Robin have said, what is it for me that reflects my self-care? What do I do? I mean, if we were to ask each one of the 6 of us, what do we do to take good care of ourselves, it would be pretty different. So we have to figure out our own recipe for self-care. And that has to thrive in an organizational culture, so that if I believe in self-care, I'd like to be living and working in a place that values my self-care as well. And so as a community, we want to encourage community-based organizations and businesses and governments to value the importance of self-care and promote self-care, because we get the most out of ourselves and we get the most out of each other when we're taking good care of ourselves, whatever that happens to look like. And not all organizations give 5 minutes of thought to self-care, but if we can start talking about it and naming it and labeling it, maybe it'll catch on. Maybe it's contagious.
Let's hope. I just want to add to all these wonderful thoughts it is definitely, if it can be built into the company culture or the employer's culture, that would be incredible. That would absolutely be incredible. However, just to start, I think with the person themselves, one of the things is to not only identify it, but I found that in my personal life, I have to be intentional, right? I have to commit that task, that time for myself within my day, right? Without that, I mean, you can say it, oh yeah, I enjoy walking my dog, right? If I don't intentionally pick up that leash, put it on and walk out the door, it's not going to happen. So one of the things that we really want to encourage, not just for myself, but for others, is be intentional, right? And that's really important.
I think Belinda had a very critical point right there, and that's ingraining self-care into the workplace culture. I think if we can create mentally safe work environments, it promotes self-care, it promotes resilience, it promotes wellness, and I think one of the biggest barriers for some employers are that they don't want to know this information, because what if they do need help? What are they going to do? Is it a liability for this organization to have that information about this client? But we're not asking you to sit down and ask your employees to give you their diagnoses, right? We're asking you to care, sit down and say, hey, I notice you're struggling. I might not be the right person to help you, but we can work together. I'll be present with you and we'll find the help that you need. And they might say, I'm good, and that's fine, but it's having those types of conversations are absolutely critical, because you create an environment in which people feel safe to take care of themselves.
Thank you all so much for that. I'm here taking notes, don't mind me, but that was a lot of good gems. So thank you all for sharing that. That actually leads into our next question, which I think I'll also open up to everyone again, which is, what actions can managers take if they notice their staff or even themselves might be going through something? How can they create a safe environment to help people be comfortable enough to share?
I want to say that it's an affirmative step. It's an affirmative action that a supervisor or a company or an employer has to take. Most people, as we've already established, are reluctant to bring up any delicate subjects in the workplace for obvious reasons. So again, related to the company culture, we need individuals who are representatives, ambassadors of the company culture, to be equipped and be willing. Everybody doesn't have to be an expert about mental health or domestic violence, but they have to be equipped and willing to have those tender conversations with somebody and invite them. As we've said, they're not going to volunteer it. It's embarrassing to be suffering from abuse or mental health challenges or family problems. So there's a way that we can encourage supervisors and HR professionals to name a situation, express concern, listen with an open heart, invite people to share something without there being a consequence or a cost. And collectively, we can do that. We can keep encouraging companies to train their employees and their supervisors on these issues so that they feel confident. People are not going to approach the topic if they don't feel confident about it or competent in it. And so they're going to avoid it, which is delivering a message that I'm going to avoid it, you should avoid it. And we want to shift that. So we've been talking about habits, right? Changing a habit, like 3 negative to what? Habits are hard to change. So we're asking companies to change their habits. And we can do that. But again, we just have to use the words and have conversations like this and encourage one another to change our habits.
I think understanding the resource. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Robin. Go ahead.
No. Thanks, Brian. Another thing that employers and employees might want to explore is vetted and properly certified health and wellness coaches. There is a growing movement in this area of health and wellness coaching. And I want to say that since the pandemic, I saw a statistic that the industry itself has grown by over 25%. And so there's a role for coaches to come into the workplace and be supportive to leaders and their employees, because that's our job. We provide that safe space. We meet the client where they're at. We look ahead forward in a future, to the future, and help the client to actually create their goals and their action steps, and then be an accountability partner for them as well. It's not typically the kind of coaching I think that many businesses are familiar with from the past. This is something that's really growing and is, I think that it's a very positive step. I actually have a relationship with a medical practice here in town who refers patients to me. And these are actually working caregivers. They have jobs, but they're also caregivers for a loved one. And so intensely stressed. And so this is an area where health and wellness coaches are actually trained to support people who are having that kind of stress. It's not therapy. So coaching and therapy is very different, but that's why perhaps that it could be looked at as another way to support employees and leaders. Thanks, Brian, for letting me.
No problem. And I was just going to add that, I think know the resources that are available to you, understand your community, which is what your workplace is your community, right? I think, having brown bag lunches from someone outside of the company to come in and talk about resilience, coping strategies, and whatnot, and even if it's the corporation that's not wanting to have these conversations, the resources can have it for them. They can start introducing the topic on behalf of the corporation. And, I think also depend on your EAP. EAPs are expensive and highly underutilized in most organizations, but also don't defer to your EAP because we want a mentally safe workplace. Between 2015, 2022, Mental Health America surveyed almost 44,000 people in 17 industries, and 4 in 5 of them reported that workplace stress affects their relationships with friends, family, and coworkers, as we previously discussed. And more than half of them spent time looking for a new position. And we recently, over the last few months, have been talking about the Great Resignation. So a lot of employers are seeing that their employees are being overburdened by having to cover multiple people's workload.
And I think just to add to everyone's input, I think Nancy had a point with the training, right? It just starts from the top down, so to speak. It just as simple as having posters up, right, in your environment that speaks to mental health or mental wellness, right? That simple task of maybe a $1.50 poster, right, or $3 if at the most, that speaks about steps that you can take for self-care, or a poster about signs of anxiety, and then a resource, right, like Brian had mentioned. There's just a vast number of local even resources that can be easily accessed online. Having that information out and having your managers aware of those, right, even if it's at that level, and then they can communicate that to the employee who might be struggling. I mean, that goes a long way. So there's little things that are not very costly that, if built into the culture of the employer, of the employment of the agency, can go a long way in supporting not only the managers so they feel confident, because like Nancy said, if they don't feel confident, they're not going to approach the topic, or the issue, and then also in supporting the employee. So yeah, little things.
I just wanted to add, thank you for mentioning posters. I meant to mention posters myself. Sometimes, again, people are ashamed of needing help. So if we can place posters like in restrooms where people are maybe often by themselves, they can, the Domestic Violence Action Center, we have posters with tear off numbers, so they can just tear off a little piece, put it in their wallet, their pocket. There are ways to convey companies' culture, willingness, and permission without even using the words until they're ready to use the words. But that's how you build a culture, is small but significant ways. So thanks for reminding me to mention posters. We put posters in lots of restrooms so people can privately get the information they need, to just confidentially and anonymously ask questions over the telephone or through a Zoom or a website. There's lots of tricks we can use as a community to help one another.
Thank you all. And Belinda, I know you are a licensed mental health counselor, and I just started my master's journey to also become one as well. And it is a tough program, I will tell you that, but it's important. And I just wanted to see if you knew of any ways that these counselors can somehow intertwine with businesses to share resources, maybe do the brown bag lunches. Just wondering if you know if that stuff exists right now. I think that's such a wonderful opportunity. But if something, stands out to you, I would love to learn more about it.
I'm going to bat that over to Brian, because his organization does a lot of valuable, work in the community. So Brian, take it away.
Thank you so much, Belinda. I think, one of the ways is by utilizing your EAP, because they're licensed mental health providers that work for your EAP. But also, again, it comes down to knowing what resources are available to you. I think AMHD is a great resource, as well as different community organizations such as wellness coaches like Robin. I think what we don't want to do is have workplaces bring in a licensed mental health provider, because I think it puts the organization at risk potentially, right? You can refer out, of course, but I think having someone other than just coming to provide resilience trainings or prevention trainings, I think a lot of organizations would be hesitant. It could be potentially costly as well. But licensed mental health providers, psychologists, clinical social workers are amazing clinicians, and I'm starting to learn much more about wellness coaches as well. From Robin, I think all of these different professions can have a huge impact on the quality of life at your workplace.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. I think now we can dive into what you folks know as far as it relates to existing resources. Brian, I know you folks have a ton, especially this month, because Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm sure, is a really busy time for you folks. But when it comes to existing resources that not only your employees, but just the general community can take part in, does anything stand out for you that's available for folks right now?
Outside of my organization, or we have a cadre of more than 20 resilience, wellness, prevention educations that we training programs that we offer for free. Most of them are about an hour long. They can be done virtually or in person at the workplace throughout the state. We have an office on Maui Island as well, and we travel to Kauai and Hawaii Islands. We also offer suicide prevention trainings. We do adult, youth, and public service mental health certifications, which is similar to medical first aid. And I think that would be a great training for leadership in organizations, or anyone who's interested. I think everyone should actually get it. And we also have a bunch of virtual resources. We have a website called NoShameGetHelp.org, where there's access to crisis services, especially the ones that AMHD are providing. We have free online mental health screenings that are based on clinically validated tools, like for depression, anxiety. There's about 12 different screenings that are available that can be shared with different workplaces, employees, and don't ask for their results. Of course, that's very private. We also put together a very comprehensive statewide finding help guide, which is broken down by county, that lists all the different social services available to the community in Hawaii.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian.
So I'm going to just take a spin off of what Brian was. So when things get maybe the yellow flag or the red flag, one of the services that the adult mental health oversees is our crisis services. So it's called Hawaii Cares 988. So that is our suicide and crisis hotline. So folks can call that anytime, 24 hours a day. If they just want to talk about what's stressing them out, or if it's more serious than that, then they can also call for that. And we can provide either just telephonic support if that's what they're needing. We can also send somebody out to meet with them within 45 minutes. And that's our crisis mobile outreach service. So that's available across the state and 24/7. So any business, doesn't matter who you are, it's a free service. So the employer or the employees don't need to feel like they're going to have a bill, mailed to them afterwards. It is a free service. It also, if things get a little worse and they may have to go someplace for a little bit, we do have licensed crisis shelters or stabilization beds in the communities. Currently, we only have it on Oahu and the Big Island, but we're looking at getting those up and running on Maui and Kauai soon. So we have that resource as well. So again, that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's Hawaii Cares 988. Locally, it's 808-832-3100, but you can just call 988. That's a simpler number to remember. So for folks who are dealing with any crisis, having issues with suicide, any thoughts around that, or even just curious about mental health or substance use resources, that is the number one stop shop to call.
I believe, can you also text, Belinda? I believe text and
You
online
can
chat.
text and
Okay.
chat as well. So you can text 988 for our more adept and younger folks who are more that medium and don't want to talk. They can text and chat. If they want to chat, they can do 988lifeline.org. But text, they can just text 988.
Yeah, I guess I can contribute. So coaches, health and wellness coaches, one of the things that employers and just the general public might want to be aware of is that there are certifications that they might want to look for when they vet health and wellness coaches. I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach, and that's a national organization that delivers a certification to coaches. We have a code of ethics, standards of practice, all of those things, and we have a specific scope of practice. So we're actually trained to be able to recognize when a particular client that we're working with might be referred to a professional mental health therapist, for example. Another thing is, I'm delivering lunch and learns right now at a local bank on mind-body connection and stress response to mental wellness and physical health. I'll be speaking to a Rotary just after this meeting is over, and I'll be talking with them about how to build a daily practice of mental wellness and mental fitness. I'll be teaching them a few ways on how they can lift mental dumbbells and practice that positivity and build it into their everyday lives. I have a 10-week program that I also offer that can be deployed in organizations as well, or to individuals. And that also helps my clients learn how to build a daily practice of mental fitness into their lives. So that's on the habit building side of things. So yes, there's a lot that wellness coaches can offer, and that I have been offering to businesses and the public. I was just at Aina Haina Library this past Saturday, and we had a free event for women and girls on mental resilience, and it was available to the public. So yeah, I love to partner with organizations as well to deliver this.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. And Nancy, I know we had covered this in our podcast episode, but for resources that that exist that weren't talked about just yet, does anything stand out for you that you think the community here should know about?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to offer that the Domestic Violence Action Center and our other community-based organizations, Shadman Family Service and Parents and Children Together and Catholic Charities, have programs available, training available, intervention available to those people who are suffering the harm of abuse or perpetrating abuse against a family member, either a child or an adult. It's very important that we remind the community that employers and HR professionals and supervisors don't have to be the experts. There are experts in the community who can help with safety planning. We often get inquiries from an employer, a supervisor, saying, I've got an employee sitting in my office and she's afraid to go home. What would be your best guidance? And we'll walk them through some things that they can offer, think about with their employee. There's a couple of things that are very unique about the workplace. One is victims, survivors of harm, take their domestic violence with them to work. And it impacts their productivity. It impacts their relationships with their coworkers. The other thing that's important to remember is the workplace is the one place that the abusive partner knows where she is. I'm saying she for the sake of the conversation, but of course we know that men can be victims as well. But abusers know where their partner is. So there are things that employers, the supervisors and the HR professionals and the coworkers might recognize, might notice in the behavior of their coworker or their staff, which gives them an opportunity to express concern or raise the topic or offer support, mention referrals. So we encourage our companies, Hawaii's businesses, to reach out to our domestic violence programs to provide the information that families need when they feel ill-equipped to do it. We don't want employers to do harm by giving advice that is not well grounded or doesn't take into consideration all of the factors that the survivor might be experiencing. Again, just as a little reminder, people don't volunteer all the details of their intimate partnership. They might share that with us on the telephone, but they might not share that with their supervisor. So it could be that a supervisor doesn't have all the information and is providing guidance that's not well suited to the circumstances that their employee is facing. So I encourage our professionals and companies to reach out to a domestic violence program. Either they can check out what programs we have available on all of our websites, Child and Family Service, Parents and Children Together, Catholic Charities, Domestic Violence Action Center. Of course, there are domestic violence programs on every island. And they could start with the website, see what's available, maybe bring in some training so that their supervisors feel a little bit more confident or competent, and encourage their employees to make an anonymous, confidential telephone call, maybe give them a little 30 minutes extra. Again, we're sort of back to flexibility, be flexible. We want to be supportive and not suffer any regret or do any harm. So thank you for inviting me to add to that.
Nancy, thank you so much. I think the underlying theme here is conversations and initiating those conversations and helping people to feel comfortable even starting it. And so I think that this might be the stage that we're in when it comes to incorporating mental health awareness, especially in the workplace, but it's critical because it's the first step. And so once we can get past that, it'll be a lot easier to incorporate all of the bigger things that we can. And so thank you all for agreeing on that. And so we're at our time where we can start to open up audience questions. But before that, I just wanted to ask one more thing about any tips of advice or anything that you would like our business leaders to know about why it's important to start these conversations in your workplace.
I think that everyone is at a state of mental wellness at some degree, right? It's a bit of a continuum. On the one end is optimized and on the other end is compromised. And we're all operating somewhere in between that. And depending on what's happening in the stage of life we're at, or if a situation or circumstance happens, we can move from being optimized to the compromised side. And so we're always fluctuating in between. And so just knowing that everyone around you is in that, is experiencing that, we all have something in common. And what that might help with is making it approachable to talk about it. So I know for me, I've had challenging times in my life. I at one time suffered from debilitating panic attacks. And I didn't want to talk about it. In fact, only until I became a coach did I'm saying this kind of on a public platform right now. I was so embarrassed to talk about it in the past, but now I know that everyone is on that, is fluctuating somewhere in between. And so I'm hoping that makes it something that can make the conversation approachable to talk to. We don't know, as someone had mentioned earlier, where anyone is. So just reaching out and taking that step forward might be a way to open the door.
Thank you.
I think
I
I
agree
just
with that.
want
And I think, oh, sorry, Belinda.
No, go ahead, Brian, you first.
Okay. I was just going to say, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and having that critical conversation is really, really important. And I think the more our leadership can be vulnerable, the more our employees will be vulnerable, and it comes back to creating that mentally safe culture in the workplace.
And I just wanted to add that, I understand because from a business perspective, I think it was mentioned before, productivity, right? And the challenges we're facing with just keeping people employed or keeping our employees, right? I think that just to develop a safe space, a place that promotes wellness, right? Mentally, physically. I think, who wouldn't want to work in a space like that that feels supported? Why would I leave that job if I feel like I'm valued, like my mental health is valued, my physical health is valued? Just feeling valued goes a long way in maintaining happy employees, productive employees, who then in turn go out into the community and be productive citizens or family members or community members. So we spend a lot of time at work, like you said, like a third of our time is there. It would just the repercussions of starting in the workplace can just bleed out into our community. It would be just, I think very valuable. So that's just to add to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. And so we had two questions pop up into the chat, which I think will take us probably right to time, because I think many of you can speak to these. The first question is, how do you handle a situation where you believe an employee could benefit from some type of mental health assistance, but they might not believe that they have an issue? How would you address that?
I'll start off. I think, my initial response would be, why do they think that they don't have a problem? They might not believe that they have a problem. Is it embarrassment though? I don't think we can force our employees to do anything, but the more you check in with staff, they may come through. If you have an EAP program, you can suggest that. You can just provide resources. You don't have to get them to admit to anything. We just want you to know that or them to know that you're there for them when they need you and when they're ready to talk about things. I think if performance is an issue, then you can talk about the performance, but don't try to force someone to come out per se with a mental health condition. And if they truly believe they don't have an issue, then there's really nothing that you can do about it, honestly.
I think just to add to that, it's that conversation, right? Having, like Nancy, but I like how Nancy put it, that tender conversation, right? Oftentimes we can recognize an issue and then we come like, hey, you have a problem, but you haven't set the stage for why you came to that conclusion. So you can maybe have that conversation in private, of course, like, hey, this is what I'm seeing, right? I'm seeing this sign and this sign and this sign. And oftentimes when, a person has the kind of these issues and concerns, this might be the problem, right? So making that connection for them sometimes is maybe a good start, because if you just come out and say, hey, you have a problem, and not really setting those check marks for them and saying, hey, this is, making that connection for them might be just the beginning. And if they still don't see it, just saying, but, should you need help, here's a resource, right? And if you like to talk, I'm here, right? So just setting the stage for that connection and letting them that safe space for them to come out when they're ready.
Thanks, Belinda.
Yeah, I think-
Sorry, Robert, you can go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention that I think that that's another reason why building mental wellness into the culture in an organization is so important, because now you're talking to everybody. And right now you're setting it as something important to, as a company to make, I guess, bring awareness to, and also create that place of openness and vulnerability and sharing. Now, we're not in a place to make a diagnosis of anything, right, as an employer or anything like that. But when everyone is talking about it a little bit more, not only more, but also with more openness, then perhaps that's another way to help raise that person's awareness of their own situation, and it could motivate them to seek help.
I just want to add one thought, and that is that people read cues and understand the mood in a company. And even if we're saying, we really care about you, but nothing else demonstrates that the company really cares about them, they're going to internalize the real message, which is, I better not mention it. Even though the supervisor is saying, you know, hey, I'm open to hearing whatever's going on. I want to help. I think that doesn't happen overnight. And I don't think you change an organization or a company culture overnight or in a short period of time. You have to lay a foundation. You have to fertilize that foundation. You have to be a role model. You have to lead by example. You have to create a culture that delivers the message consistently that we are invested in your self-care. We are going to make adjustments to the way we work as a company so that you are safe and free to get the help that you need, maybe not during work time, but when you need it. And everybody is at a different place on their continuum. I may get help after a year and a half. Somebody else may get help after 15 minutes. And we have to give people room to exercise their personal action when they're ready to do it, as long as we remain open and supportive to them, with them, as they take the steps that's going to work for them. We sort of forget. We think, well, everybody's going to do it the way I'm going to do it. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you all so much. I was just going to quickly add that I think regardless of where you are in your professional journey, there's very much still that stigma that we all hold when it comes to, I think, that very first time that we open up. And so we're also in a workplace culture where, you know, new hires and Gen Z and new people who are, you know, taking over the workforce are really specific about how they want their employers to value them. And so creating those safe workplaces are a crucial part of that picture. And so thank you all for sharing that. And we have time for one more question, and this one is for Nancy. But the question is, how would a smaller business or organization provide a confidential space for a victim of DV to seek assistance from their business owner or employer? Many times, if the company is smaller than 50 employees, it's not super easy to be confidential, and it may be challenging for an employee to come forward. So what types of support, or how can you create that space for them?
Again, I mean, I think what we've all been sharing is that we deliver messages to our workforce by the way we behave and by the environment that we're creating. And if we are concerned about somebody, we can't just assume that they are going to confide in us without there being a foundation for privacy, confidentiality, the energy that lives in company culture gives very strong messages to people. So we want to assure survivors of domestic violence that their revelations, their disclosures to us are confidential, private. We care about their safety. We give them the time they need. This is a huge revelation disclosure, and it involves a huge number of steps to take for a person to make a decision about what they're going to do. And again, as a supervisor, I can't set expectations for what a person's going to do and how I'd like them to do it. Those are their decisions to make and their steps to take. So if employers and businesses have questions, we provide training for companies to fashion a supportive workplace environment. For some people, the workplace could be their point of entry into getting assistance or making an escape. So we have to take very seriously the danger, that the risk that a person may be in, and create an environment that gives them permission to talk about it and confide. And that comes from my confidence and my competence in addressing the conversation, addressing the topic. Well, I don't know whether I answered the question exactly, but call me up. I'll tell you.
Thank you all. And we are just about at time. So just in wrap up, I wanted to thank you all so much for joining me here today. I think this was a wonderful conversation and I wish we could continue it, but we did record this, so we'll put it up on our previously scheduled one can come, but also folks who just want to watch in the future. So again, thank you all for being a part of this. This was a really good launch point, I think, for beginning to weave these conversations and new ideas and initiatives into our workplaces. So thank you all. And we do have the website up. It's cochawaii.org/mental health, where we'll be showing this webinar, plus our podcast episodes on mental health, as well as community resources. So what exists from Nancy's organizations, Brian's, and everyone else's. If you would like something shared, feel free to reach out to us and we can have that up for you. But again, thank you all for joining us today. This was such a wonderful opportunity, and have a wonderful day.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Aloha.
much. Aloha.